Hello, my name is Vicki Allen, and I'm currently an interim director for the Matador Involvement Center, and I want to welcome you to this year's themed event, When They Call You a Scholar, Climbing the Invisible Barrier. This particular program is being sponsored by Unified We Serve, which is CSUN's volunteer program. Unified We Serve is designed to unify our students, faculty, staff, and community members together to provide a greater amount of resources to better serve our community. As we've been in this virtual environment, it's been important for us to continue to provide educational programs to CSUN students that connect them to our community. And Unified's programming, one of the things that we love to do is connect to our Freshman Common Reading program. This year, the book that was selected was When They Call You a Terrorist, a Black Lives Matter Memoir by Patrisse Khan-Cullors. So this particular event this evening is connected to this particular reading. So now I would like to welcome you and introduce you to our two moderators. That will be Denise Estrada and Andrea Gutierrez. Enjoy this evening's program.
Thank you, Vicki. The purpose of today's event is to empower, encourage, and support students to continue on their academic journey. We know it's difficult, and we want to remind you that you are not alone by hearing the academic journey of the faculty. But before we begin, I have a few announcements. To start us off and get us thinking about today's topic, please interact with the poll questions that you can find at the bottom. We have designed a time, okay, as you can see when they show, we have decided time for questions and answers towards the end of the panel. If you have any questions at any time, just please type it in the Q&A chat. You also will find that at the bottom. Also, at the end of today's event, we will be randomly selecting participants to receive a special giveaway. If you're selected, we will email you about delivery instructions. I will now let Destiny introduce our speaker for today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Destiny Estrada. Now, for today's panel, we have Dr. Flores Marcial from the Chicano Studies Department. Just to say a little bit about her, her studies include Indigenous, intellectual, and cultural history that focuses on the Zapotec community of Oaxaca, Mexico. And I actually took a course with her, and it was super interesting. But I'll actually allow Dr. Flores Marcial, if you could share a little bit more about your studies and your research for us, if you can.
I am the first person in my family to finish any formal education, so including elementary school. My parents could not finish their own elementary school because when they were children, they lived in a rural place that did not have really any opportunities for their parents, like for employment, there were very few, almost no opportunities. So they could not finish their elementary school. So in my family, I'm the first to finish elementary school, middle school, high school, and then to go to college. I know that the questions are kind of like, how did I end up with a PhD? And so let me tell you, I went to school, the public school system in Los Angeles. So I attended public schools from the very beginning. My parents came to the United States to work as immigrants, and they did not speak English. So when I started school, I did not speak English. My very first language when I was living in Oaxaca with my grandparents was Zapotec, and then my parents, they speak Spanish. Their parents did not teach them Zapotec because that was one of the results of these, racist attitudes toward Indigenous peoples, that Indigenous languages were not valuable. That somehow speaking an Indigenous language was going to keep young children from learning things. But again, these racist attitudes that ultimately did have results, because My parents did not speak Zapotec, even though their parents were all native Zapotec speakers. So when we started with, my life here in the United States, I only spoke Spanish. And I went into elementary school as a Spanish speaker, and I was placed in a special program for English language learners. At that point in the 80s, it was called ESL, English as a Second Language. So I'll start by really saying that was, it was a situation that carried over, not just in the time when I was in first grade. Like, I learned English in first grade. That was it. I only, in first grade, I learned English. It took me that 1 year to be fluent in English. I was a little kid, so little kids, their minds are so fresh and they learn so quickly. So I learned English in the first grade, but that mark, putting me in that program, English as a second language program, actually ended up affecting me my entire career in public school, because every year I had to take a test to prove that I spoke English. Even after finishing elementary school and going to middle school, I was always placed in remedial classes. So teachers, I don't think, when they first meet you and they haven't talked to you, they assume so many things, or they assumed so many things about me. So they really thought that I didn't speak English. In high school, I was already, in advanced classes. I was eligible for AP courses, but I was never put in them because I was supposed to be an English language learner student. And instead of putting me in honors classes, to which I was eligible for, and I could have done well, my teachers kept telling me, like, why are you in this class? The system, the way it worked is that they kept putting me in remedial classes. So not only did they put me in this program, and then they kept me from getting into honors classes, into AP classes. In one, really, it was, it's one of those things that just kind of stays with you for the rest of your life. I did really well in my first year of high school. I always liked to study. I'll say that. Like, it was just something that I enjoyed. And I also think it's because my family was really poor. So like growing up, we didn't have like anything that was fancy. We didn't have stuff. But one of the things we had were books, like books as in from the library. Like, we would go to the library and get books. So I really loved books, and I thought, wow, this is so cool. Like, you could learn stuff through the books. So I just liked books, and I would read and read and read. So my first year of high school, I did really well. And one of my teachers told the counselor that I should be in an honors class, in an AP class. They said, Xochitl needs to be in an honors history course. She shouldn't be in this, like, remedial social science class. And so the teacher actually, because my parents were always working, they weren't there to advocate for me. And they put me in this honors class. And the first week, like, everything was great. Like, everything, the teacher was like, wow, so I think you're going to be a historian. I didn't know that I was going to be a historian, is the truth. Not at that point. But someone, because there's only a certain number of students that can go into any certain class. A student, basically was given my spot in that class, and I was taken out of the honors class because that student claimed that I was an ESL student. So I was supposed to be an ESL student still, even though I had proven that I was not an ESL student anymore. So I was taken from that class. And that really, it really marked me. I didn't know, when you're like 15, you don't really know about injustices, like living them, like how this actually works in the real world. Like, how does injustice work? It works like that, you know, with a student who doesn't have parents to advocate for them and tell the counselor and tell people that this student needs to be in this honors class. So they took me out of the class. And you know where they put me? Auto mechanics. They put me in auto mechanics. I was the only person, I was the only girl in auto mechanics class because I was the only class that was left. And instead of putting me in an honors class, they put me in auto mechanics. So I talked to the teachers and they realized that something was wrong. And so instead of kind of, you know, continuing to fight for that space, what I think this teacher did, and I didn't know it at the time, was they really coached me. They helped me to figure out like how I was going to end up going to college, because at that point, I really didn't know. And I grew up in the 80s. I graduated high school in the late 90s. We still didn't have computers in the classrooms, and we didn't have Google. So there were no cell phones yet. I didn't, you know, it wasn't as, you know, kind of convenient. You know, right now we have a phone and we can just Google things. And I really didn't know that I could go to college. And so the teacher, I think the greater good that she did for me, and because she kind of knew a little bit of my story, so I think she started coaching me so that I would end up going to college. And she told me, you need to apply to college. And my parents didn't have any money, so I didn't think that I was ever going to be able to go to college. Like, how are my parents going to pay for this? But she said, you know, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I've always liked to cook. So one of my chores at home, growing up, so I'm one of 4 kids and I'm the oldest. So my job was to cook. And so I always liked to cook. And I told the teacher, I said, I want to work in a restaurant. Maybe I could be a chef. And the teacher said, that sounds really good. But you know, you could go to college and you could still cook. And I thought that that was smart. And I thought, oh, okay. And I ended up starting my college career at community college because I was really afraid that my parents couldn't afford to send me to college. Like, I really didn't know how to pay for it. And so I ended up going to Santa Monica College. But that's really where I realized, and I still didn't know what I wanted, what kind of job I wanted to do, what career I wanted to have. I started out wanting to be an aerospace engineer. I had really good grades in math and science, but I was I didn't have any guidance. So I now know that one of the things that is so valuable when you don't know what you're going to do, and like when you don't know where you want to go, is you really want to have people to talk to. Not people who are going to give you any answers. I don't think you want answers. I think you really want some guidance, like some ideas, right? Kind of like this teacher who said, well, you can still cook and you can still go to college, you know, and I thought, yeah. So when I started my career at Santa Monica College, I got really good grades because I always liked school. So I liked reading, I liked doing the homework. But that was the very first time when I took a history class that I realized that I didn't really know the history about myself. Like, I knew where I came from. I knew where my grandparents were from, where my parents were from, but I really didn't know a history of myself, like who I was or why I was even where I was, you know, here in this city. So that was a pretty good beginning, just like in essence, because it gave me a seed that I ended up kind of going back to. So I took all the classes that I needed to take for transfer. But when I was ready to transfer to UCLA, I declared a major in Latin American studies and in Spanish. Because I always wanted to be a teacher. That's something that I did know. Like I thought, I like to teach. So if I'm not going to be an engineer, or if I don't know what to do, like I'm going to be a teacher because I enjoy being in the classroom. And I thought with the degree in Latin American studies and Spanish, I could be a teacher.
Mm-hmm. So as you're talking about you kind of figuring out, you know, as you're going through your academic journey and figuring out what you really wanted to do, how did you decide to, you know, go about your master's or your graduate program in that sense? And also, how did you handle graduating after getting the bachelor's, right? So I suppose first we can talk about after getting your bachelor's, after deciding what you wanted to do, what was that like for you? Because I know it's scary finishing college and then what, you know? So then moving on to a master's program, how did that all work out for you?
So I thought, okay, I'm going to be a teacher. I'm going to be a teacher for the Los Angeles School Unified District. And when I was graduating, like 2002 from UCLA, there was a call from the LAUSD for emergency credential teachers. Now, remember, I don't know anyone who was a teacher. I just wanted to be a teacher myself, and I didn't have any mentors or anything like that. So I really wish I had known that I was supposed to apply for jobs way before I graduated. I didn't. I thought, oh, first I need to graduate and then I'll apply to a job. I didn't know it was supposed to be, you know, apply to a job with a lot of time before you start graduating. So by the time, I remember some of my friends were applying to those same jobs, and I thought, wow, how are they applying to those jobs? They haven't graduated. Like, I didn't know how it worked, so I had no idea. I did graduate, but I didn't have a job. And I applied to so many jobs, but I didn't know how to write a cover letter. I didn't have a resume. Like, I really wish somebody had told me, you know, you need to have a resume. And I did have a job the entire time I was in college. I sometimes had 2 jobs. Sometimes I had 3 jobs because I was, you know, I mean, no one else was helping me with this. So when I realized that I didn't have a job, that I wasn't getting hired, and I didn't have the quote unquote college experience because I was always working. Like, I didn't go to any of the college parties. I didn't do any of that because I was always working. So I thought, you know, I never moved away from home. I want to know what that's like, but how can I do that? So what I ended up doing was I moved to Mexico City because I thought, well, I have family there. I have a cousin who he was finishing his degree in engineering. And that's what I did. I moved to Mexico City. And while I was there, I was able to get a job because I speak English, and, you know, getting a translator job and just doing English language stuff while in Mexico City. And so making a reasonable living. I mean, I was able to pay the rent in an apartment with my cousin. But I started going to seminars at Mexico's National University, which is a really renowned, respected university that is really rigorous in terms of the research. And while I was there, it kind of dawned on me that I could study indigenous languages, I could study my own history, I could write about it. And I basically came back. I was able to find a job as a Spanish teacher in the San Fernando Valley. But I continued being in touch with my professors at UCLA and telling them how interested I was in pursuing a graduate degree. And I did not know that you could go from undergraduate degree to a PhD. I had no idea. I thought you had to get a master's.
Oh,
And
so you
I-
didn't do the traditional masters?
so they're not traditional, I learned.
Oh, okay.
You don't have to do that. I didn't know that. So I actually went from an undergraduate degree to experience. I was, working as a Spanish teacher, and I had the experience at UNAM that I had taken on during that time that I was unemployed, basically. And I used that toward my application for a PhD at UCLA. That's how I ended up at UCLA in the PhD program. But also a key element in that, kind of in that decision, was one of the jobs I had at UCLA in the Office for Students with Disabilities, and so remember, this is still kind of low tech life. I mean, still in the 2000, when the world was supposed to collapse because of Y2K. 2001, I had a job reading books for a student who was a PhD student, but he was blind. So he was blind, and a lot of the books that he needed to read were not, the computer could read them, but it was very robotic. And also a lot of those books were really old, and the computer couldn't read them. That's how I ended up with a minor in Spanish, because I was an undergraduate reading these books for a PhD student. And I loved it. It was such a great experience. But the student who ultimately became my friend, he's a professor at Cal State Fullerton. He's a Spanish professor at Cal State Fullerton now. But he told me, he said, Sochi, you need to do a PhD. And he was just a source of inspiration, because uh, his life experience and his challenges, not being able to see, he would go from UCLA on the bus all the way to Fullerton to teach the classes that he was teaching. And it just, like, the determination and, like, just this like fire inside of someone when they really want something. That's something that stayed with me, and which I ultimately ended up using, while I was in the PhD program at UCLA.
Wow, that's awesome that he's had that impact on you for this long. Um, I'm gonna bring it over to Andrea. She'll ask you the next question. I'm really interested about this next question.
Hello. Okay. Thank you for sharing your background and how you got your doctorate and like everything you had to go through. But something I wanted to ask you is, how did you face failure or obstacles throughout your college courses? Because as a student ourselves, like it can get really overwhelming sometimes, and like we feel like lost. So how do you face that?
I'm still facing it now. It's something that we really, like, you have to put yourself out there. Like, we have to, especially if we are first generation college students, if we are, if English isn't our first language, if our family is poor, if we have to work while we study, like all of those things. There are people who don't have to do any of those things. Like, there are people who do not have to, face any of those challenges. And those of us who do, we face failure and the potential of failure, like, all the time. It's just part of our own path and experience. I do want to say that, like, because of my life experience, because I came from an immigrant family, and we were poor, and like all of these things that I've already talked about, to me, I was so driven. Like, I was like, I'm going to succeed. Whatever I'm going to do, I'm going to succeed. And for me, I felt like I couldn't fail. Like, that was the kind of pressure that I don't I mean, my parents always wanted me to succeed, but I don't think it was my parents' fault. Like they didn't, you know, I wasn't like, they didn't say anything to me like, you know, we don't want you to fail, like never. But I think I said it to myself, like I don't want to fail. So I mean, just preparing for that, like I tried not to fail. I tried to do, you know, all my work, tried to, as much as I could, meet all of the absolute minimum requirements, like the absolute minimum. But I always know that I worked hard. So that's why I ended up doing well, you know, in my classes. But there are reasons for why we fail that have nothing to do with us sometimes. Like that have nothing to do with the time that we have spent, or like our drive, or like our intelligence. Like they have nothing to do with that. It's true. Sometimes we fail because the environments that we are putting ourselves in are not ready to accept us. And so I think that when we do fail sometimes, and I did fail one class, because I thought I'm smart. I don't need to take the you know, the prep course for this other class. I'm just going to skip the prep course. I'm going to go straight to the other course, you know, and like I went to like calculus 2, and then like I thought, oh, I'm so confused. I should have taken that other class. And I went to office hours. I mean, I know what I did wrong. I should have taken the prep class, right? But then I went to the office hours and I asked a question, and the professor didn't understand me, but rather than saying, you know, you should take a prep course, they basically told me that I shouldn't be in college. They're like, this is not meant for you. I don't know why you're here. You're not ready for this. You know, you should think about something else to do. And I was, you know, an undergrad, and I felt horrible because I thought, oh, am I not made for this? But then I kind of came back to myself and I thought, wait, no, I am made for this, and this person just doesn't know me. And at that point, I mean, I kind of knew what I had made a mistake, but I didn't really, you know, I mean, I hadn't unenrolled from the class or anything. So, but that's what I'm talking about. You know, sometimes it really isn't our fault. It wasn't that I wasn't smart enough. That environment that I put myself in, and that person who I talked to, they were not ready for me.
So now that you've talked about all of that, I think this is a good question to ask, especially since that professor told you like that you aren't meant for college, which is such an awful response. I know so many students get told that and just feel like I'm not enough when they are. But if you can go back in time, what would you advise yourself? What would you tell yourself now after knowing what you know and going through, having gone through what you've gone through? What would you tell yourself?
First of all, I really wish that I had had the internet. I didn't have the internet. I did get a computer when I was 22 for the first time, and internet, like that was the first time that I had internet and computer. But I really wish I had enjoyed more of that time, because we get so caught up in the stress, right? Like, and sometimes the stress doesn't even let us enjoy the things that we're supposed to enjoy. Like there are moments that you're supposed to enjoy, like take a break, do something nice or fun. You know, it could be anything. It could be walking on the beach, you know, it could be running at the park, it could be eating an ice cream, whatever. It doesn't have to be something like grand or like fancy or expensive. But I really wish I had taken the time to enjoy more of that, because I was so stressed out during my undergraduate, because I was working, I had 2 jobs, 3 jobs. I would go to one job at like 4 a.m, get out, go to another job at 11, get out, and then go to class, and then get out of class, and then try to do homework like way into the night. And I didn't, I really wanted to learn how to swim. I didn't learn how to swim, and there were all these pools at UCLA, like, and they were free for the student. I mean, not free because we're paying like all that tuition, but I really wish I had learned how to swim, taken a swim class. I really wish there were these like salsa clubs, and I would see them dancing in the middle of the quad, and I just thought, wow, that looks like fun, but I had to go and do something else. So that was one thing. I think if you are one of the students who gets really, really stressed out and gets so consumed in your college work and then your work that you don't enjoy things, like we really need to like let our minds de-stress a little bit, decompress, and do something that will let you do that, because your mind needs to refresh from all of the responsibilities. But another one is really to seek out mentors. Like if you meet someone, and a mentor doesn't have to be like an older person, or they can be like different ones, and like get multiple mentors, not just one, because you want to be able to have different perspectives. So looking at just like the people who are in your environment, meeting people who you feel comfortable talking to, and really kind of thinking about what the future might look like, not getting caught up in it. Just one of the things, and remember, again, no telephone or internet for me. So I used to look at the newspaper, and I would go through the classified ads, and I would look for jobs, like the job that I thought I wanted to have, like, oh, I want this job, or I want that job. And I wanted to see what their qualifications were, like, because since I didn't have, my parents couldn't help me, and I didn't really have mentors, I would look at the newspaper and just like look for jobs. I wasn't ready for those jobs yet, but it was kind of like a way for me to have an idea of what I needed to do in order to have those jobs that I was dreaming of having. So talking to people, getting like you want like a diverse set of friends who are going to be your college friends, who know what this life is like, but also who have like similar kind of trajectories. You could, one of my best friends and we used to apply to jobs together, not to the same job. She was an architect and I was a historian, but we would say, okay, this weekend we're going to sit for 2 hours and we're going to apply to these jobs. We would sit together and we would like apply to the jobs, but we would write those essays together, like the cover letters, finally, right? When we finally figured how to do that. So having like a support system is really important. A support system that includes whoever is a positive influence in your life. That could be your, significant other, your professor, someone in some office, someone in some profession, someone who's going to like support you and inspire you. A support network is really, really important.
Awesome. Thank you so much for all of your input. And after hearing everything that you've said, I think it's interesting to now look at the poll results from earlier that we did at the beginning. Now, I'm not sure can everyone else see the poll results or no? Everyone else can see them?
Oh, I can.
So I think it's interesting, like, let's go to the second one. Did you find it difficult to decide on a major? And about 50% of people said yes, and about a quarter people said, somewhat. But and nobody said no. Did you find yourself? Oh, actually, sorry, that was for a separate one. But I think that's interesting how it's, we've had similar experiences as students trying to figure out what you really want to do, and that, you don't always have to figure that out right now, that it could take time, and that's all right. And also, like for question 4, what is your outlook on future semesters? But I think it's awesome how, well, it is kind of half and half, I suppose, but it is a quarter of optimistic, 75% scared, and a quarter doubtful. But I mean, that happens, just like how we mentioned earlier, obstacles do come in the way, and at times it can make us feel like, we can't do it, we can't push through it. But I hope though that with stuff like this, right, like this webinar, can make everyone feel, especially before finals, inspired. I know I was inspired. I hope everyone else was inspired. And I really feel like that was the push that I needed, and hopefully everyone else needed, to keep pushing, especially because finals week is super soon. But after now talking about that, I want to bring it now to our fellow committee leaders, Leslie, Galinda, and Wendy Pham, who are gonna do the Q&A segment.
All right, thank you, Destiny. We'll now begin the Q&A portion. If you have any questions for our guests, please write them in the chat. So to begin, I'd like to ask Dr. Flores a question. Did you ever encounter a decision that changed your life?
That changed my life. Yes. I'm thinking because I've encountered a few. I know something that really influenced my life, like a lot, was thinking about my success, like deciding that I really wanted to have children after I achieved at least one of my dreams. So my first dream was to have a college degree. And I know that the decision to have children after that was something that changed my life for sure. That's a really personal decision. Like, it's a really, really personal decision that it's something that I know that I was so like set on, right? So I'm not gonna have kids until after I have a college degree. And I did it for sure. It definitely changed my life, because after that, once I realized that I could achieve my dreams, I thought, okay, now I have another dream that I want to achieve, and so forth. Like it became like a domino effect.
All right, thank you so much for answering that.
So we have a question from one of our participants, and I would like to read off the question that they have. They said that, would you say another form of injustice is the lack education on environmentalism, sustainability? So their family used to live in Barrio in Tijuana, and I have made increasingly aware of the sorry state of the Tijuana River being a waste river. These kinds of problems lead to many other things, such as food and water insecurity to the people I see living there. So if you would like, you can take a couple minutes to, it's a dense question too, to answer. So this participant wanted to know how there is injustice based on the lack of education about environmentalism and sustainability.
I mean, there is, and we have so many examples of that. I remember in one of my courses when I was taking like an environmental history at UCLA, like 20 years ago, we looked at maps that are made by the Environmental Protection Agency. So this is 20 years ago, remember, like 20 years ago. And that was the very first time that I realized the ways in which these different forms of segregation, right, cause these other injustices. So in that map, what I saw was that the people that live along the freeways in LA, especially because those freeways were designed to go through communities of color, that so many of those communities had all of these terrible illnesses, including, some illnesses that are not curable. And so it is definitely a form of injustice that this type of information, now, of course, now there's a little bit more awareness than like 20 years ago, right? Like it's so different right now, especially because of the internet. And we're able to share more information and if you are personally interested and want to share this information, you can, but there's still, still lacking. And for sure it creates like layers and layers of injustice, that those of us who are connected to, those communities, we know they exist and we know that they're there. But if you're not connected to these communities and you don't make an effort, then you won't know how this actually has visible, measurable negative effects, the injustice of the lack of education on environmentalism, for sure.
No, I have to agree with you too. Yeah, this question opened my eyes about, I mean, sustainability, the concept of environmentalism had existed way before, but taking action was rather a bit, in my opinion, a little late. And I wish that the attention was brought up a little sooner so that this situation isn't a boiling pot that's basically exploding and overflowing at this point. But it made me realize that environmentalism in a way is such a broad situation that it has really impacted every single individual basically on this planet. And it's really outrageous. I have to agree with you on that. But I thank the participant for asking that question. It brings up a light of conversation to it. And if anyone else has any other questions, please feel free to drop them into the Q&A, and we further have a discussion for this. So I have a quick question regarding previous conversation, is that if you could go back into time, what would you advise yourself? And if you were to go back in time, what age would you, what age or what time period would you jump back and say, hey, this is something you should think about?
Just thinking about the fact that I didn't have any mentors, I really wish that I could go back multiple times, like when I was really young, and just telling myself, even in elementary school, that there are people who are willing to guide you, like in ways that my parents couldn't. My parents were always supportive. They just couldn't guide me because they didn't have the experience of education. Then later on, when I was influenced, like, when you're young and impressionable, like at 17 years old, when I told my then boyfriend's dad that I wanted to be an aerospace engineer, and he says, oh, they don't hire brown women, and I was really impressionable, and I kind of believed him, even though I was doing well in math and physics. I really wish I hadn't let that get to me. I really wish I hadn't believed him, because I believed him at that time. And then later on, at 22, when I was so stressed out with work and college, I really wish I could go back and just tell myself that it's okay to change your mind. Like, it's okay to think that you're going to be a teacher and then change your mind and want to be an electrical engineer, like, it's okay to change your mind, especially when you're young. That's such a privilege to be able to change your mind. I know that I felt that I didn't have that privilege because I was fighting so hard to realize my dreams. So I felt so pressured, to accomplish what I set out to do, that I didn't allow myself to change my own mind. So I really wish that I had been able to just feel okay with having a change of heart, like with something that feels so monumental, right? Like changing your major, like
Yeah, for sure.
that's a big, huge deal. But I really wish that I had had the courage and the guidance at that point to make that decision. I mean, I'm still okay. I got a PhD, but I feel that if I had given myself that opportunity at 22, you know, just it, I could have known what that would have been like, and I don't, and that's okay. I'm all right with that now, but it took me a while to be okay with that.
Yeah, but yeah, thank you for the advice. And I mean, it's really good insight about what we could possibly see in our own path. But as questions are not coming up anymore, and there doesn't seem to be any questions that other students have,
Mhm.
I'm gonna pass it over to Jasmine Mendez, our program assistant, and can go on from go ahead with this, and she can take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wendy, and also thank you, Dr. Flores Marcial, for being here today. I personally have found this conversation to be very eye-opening. I didn't know personally that you could easily go get a doctorate after your bachelor's. I always like supposed, oh, you know, there's like this sort of process that has to go on. But I think we are all really appreciative of you speaking with us today on this subject matter of, you know, education, the whole intersectionality of education. So thank you so much, as well as our committee leaders who have curated, have monitored this event as well. So without further ado, I will let our events assistant, Esmeralda Sanchez, give a few final words as well.
Hi, everyone. I just want to say thank you again for joining us today. But that brings us to our end of our event.
Take care, everybody. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.